making sense common again. It's your host, David Knight.
Welcome back. I'm David Knight. We're talking about The View and their quick back and forth about socialism. Meghan McCain got very upset because the whole crew there, of course, are Democrats, socialists, because they, let's understand, that's where they're really coming from. So it was the back and forth that we saw there, and then everybody started trolling her on media and saying, but we have the post office. We have so many things that are so wonderful. Let's talk about the post office. I have an article here from James Bovard, Mises Institute, and he's talking about 40 years of going after the post office. He said, this week is the 40th anniversary of the publication of my first attack on the Postal Service. It was called Time to Stamp Out the Postal Monopoly. And of course, it was Lysander Spooner who nearly stamped out the postal monopoly back in the mid-1800s. Spooner gave them a run for their money. Because the government had a monopoly, postal rates soared. And so Spooner said, this is absolutely absurd. I can do better than this. And one guy started offering mail service. He did it so effectively that in order to shut him down, they had to enact a law to give the post office a monopoly. That was Lysander Spooner. Great libertarian. He was a guy who was an ardent abolitionist, but he was also ardently anti-Lincoln because Lincoln destroyed the Constitution. He said what Lincoln is turning the government into is far worse because he's going to make a slave out of everybody. And he was absolutely right about that as well. It was not the right remedy. But here's some of the quotes that James Bovard has had over the years. He said in 1987 New York Times op-ed, I wrote, first-class mail is becoming the ghetto of American communications. The U.S. cannot afford to enter the next century with a communication system that is little changed from the 18th century. That was 1987. Before email, by the way. Was really out there. You had a little bit of DARPANET and things like that, but it wasn't really being used. And then he goes on to say, if you had to invest your life savings in one company, would you choose United Parcel Service, UPS, or the Postal Service? He says, but unfortunately, we've already invested our lives in the Postal Service. Is what everybody came back and told him. Then the Wall Street Journal, he said, the American people no longer need a monopoly that appears more interested in storing letters than in delivering them. In 1991, he wrote a Wall Street Journal piece. He said the post office is the only delivery business that believes that speed is irrelevant. In 2011, he said when people bought forever stamps, they didn't realize that the name referred to the delivery time and not the stamp prices. And finally, he says at this point, the Postal Service is rapidly becoming little more than an income maintenance program for 630,000 employees. That's right, Newman. This is where we're coming from, folks. When you look at socialism, as Reason points out, when they're talking about the back and forth, the inconvenient facts that are not paid attention to by the left, they said it might come as a surprise to everyone to realize that every penny of the excessive $21,000 a year that they spend on each and every student in the school district of Ocasio-Cortez, $21,000. They spend more per capita on students there than anywhere else. And you look at the schools that spend the most on their students per capita, and they have 90+%. Most of these things are higher than 95% illiteracy and innumeracy. As we see, every time Ocasio-Cortez gets on the air, she knows absolutely nothing about math and couldn't care about facts either. We look at this. They point out it might come as a surprise that every penny of that $21,000 they spend on each and every student comes from capitalism. That's right. The government doesn't create anything. It is people involved in being able to work that creates that wealth. Hitler understood that. He said that Stalin had made the wrong choice by taking the industry first. Hitler said, we got to keep this National Socialism. That's what Nazism was. We got to keep it going by keeping a veneer of private ownership on it. Welcome back. I'm David Knight. Let's talk a little bit about the censorship that is coming out. I like to call it the anti-socials. I think that's what we need to start calling Facebook, Twitter, Google. They are the anti-socials, right? They're not social media. They're antisocial, just like Antifa is not anti-fascist. They are anti-First Amendment, anti-FA, anti-First Amendment. So these people are basically antisocial. They're anti-free speech, anti-First Amendment. One of the worst bills that I've seen in quite some time is coming out of the UK. It surfaced over the weekend. What they're trying to do is take the Tommy Robinson tactic to the entire internet. So that's why it is important when we see these individual cases, because they establish a principle. They show us the mentality of these people. We understand where they are headed with these particular issues. There was a time, once upon a time, the founders of this country realized that it was the principles that were involved, not the level of taxation. The level of taxation that the British put on the American colonists was very small. They always start out that way. The income tax here in the United States started out as a 1% tax on the 1%, the highest income people, right? And so they were looking at a 3% tax on tea, things like that. Now, in most states, some states like Texas, you do get an exemption on groceries that you buy. That's not always the case. Back in North Carolina, sales tax was fully applied to food. And so when I was working with libertarians, we made a commercial saying that we fought a revolution over a 3% tax on tea. And look at this. Now we've got an 8% tax on everything in the grocery bag here on my kitchen table. They will fight you over the crumbs, folks. But the other principle, of course, that was very important, something that has resurfaced in Brexit, is the idea of taxation without representation, regulation without representation, because that is now what Theresa May has put on their table. That they're going to come out of the European Union, the soft Brexit. It's only for the people with a soft head. You got to be pretty stupid to fall for that. To say, we're going to give up our representation in Brussels, but then Brussels will still control us economically and so forth. They'll still control our regulations and tariffs and taxes and so forth. But we won't have any say-so in any of that. I mean, it is just the polar opposite of what the American Revolution was fought on. But now what they have done in UK, as I said, they're trying to take this Tommy Robinson tactic of censorship internet-wide. They don't want anybody to report something that they don't agree with. So you have tech firms, as they're saying, should be made liable for any fake news on their sites. This is coming out of the UK. So what they're going to do is they're going to impose fines or whatever on Twitter, Facebook, Google, if you don't take down something that we object to. So the government will be the final arbiter of what is true. And no matter how ridiculous the story that comes out, whether it's a ridiculous story about the Las Vegas shooting, or whether it's a ridiculous story about 9/11, or whether it is a ridiculous story about the once-a-year false flag gas attack in Syria, or the false flag Novichok gas attack in Skripal, no matter how ridiculous and devoid of facts the story that the UK government or the American government puts out there, you better report that. And if you say anything against it, we're going to call you a conspiracy theorist, and we're going to take your voice away. We're going to shut you down. Oh, we won't do it. We will use the anti-social media people to do it. So they work hand in glove. And of course, the social media people will say, oh, well, we have to do it. They're holding a gun to our head. We have to do it. They were designed, they were put in place to do this. They shut down LifeLog, DARPA's LifeLog, the very day they created Facebook, which gives them exactly the same function. We want to talk about them scraping data. Here's a quote from the article from Yahoo. Actually, it's Reuters that they put through it. Companies like Facebook made it easy for developers to scrape users' data and to deploy it in other campaigns without their knowledge or consent. Well, let's understand what's going on here. It's not just developers who are scraping data. It's not just corporations who are scraping data. It is the government. It is the government. Let's grab that Michael Hayden quote that I play all the time. They're not interested in bad people. They're interested in interesting people like President Trump and anybody associated with his campaign. They're interested in the crowd. The crowd is very interesting to them because they want to know if you're buying those fake stories about 9/11 or about the Syrian gas attacks or about the gas attack in Salisbury, England. They want to know, are you buying that? If not, they have to change the story a little bit. They have to change the story for the Vegas shooting or whatever. And so they want to know if their particular narrative is working or not. That's very important to them. Here's Michael Hayden talking about that.
Not about guilt. In fact, let me be really clear, okay? NSA doesn't just listen to bad people. NSA listens to interesting people.
Yeah, that's so funny. Interesting people. And the crowd there of young lawyers in training laugh about that. Oh, yeah, we're interested in interesting people. Good. And they want to know all your data because that lets them know what you think, what you share. You are not going to be able to see any information that they don't want you to see. You're not going to hear any information they don't want you to see. And you're not going to be able to share any information they don't want you to share. And they're going to make monkeys out of us all, folks, if we let them do this. And so this article from Reuters says tech firms like Facebook should be made liable for harmful and misleading material on their websites, and they should pay a levy so that they can be regulated, say British lawmakers. Warning of a crisis in democracy due to misuse of personal data. Let me tell you something. The crisis in democracy comes when you shut down free speech and free thought. That's what they're worried about. They're worried about an outbreak of freedom. They're worried that they have lost control of the narrative. British broadcasters, whether publicly or privately owned, must generally stick to strict rules on political balance. That's called the fairness doctrine here. It completely shut down any thought or speech or conservative radio. It was only after President Reagan shut down the strict rules on political balance that they called the fairness doctrine here that we had the rise of talk radio. And then we had the internet. And boy, that was like an H-bomb. That was an atomic bomb when we had the fairness doctrine removed. That was an atomic bomb to their control of information. Then the internet became a hydrogen bomb for them. And they've got to shut that down. And so as they're talking about this, they say fake news and misinformation is poisoning British democracy, according to these MPs. As I said before, that really is, I think, a Freudian slip. You want to talk about poisoning democracy? They shut down Julian Assange as soon as he started talking about that fake gas attack in Salisbury, UK. They had to do something that for 3 years, they'd had 3 years running, they had a fake gas attack in Syria that they would use to try to ramp things up. They got shut down every time. So it's like, this time we got to sex it up a little bit more. Let's have a fake gas attack here in the UK. When he pushed back on that, that's when they shut him down. And at the bottom of the hour, we got Roger Stone joining us to talk about Julian Assange. So stick with us for that. Damian Collins. Oh, that's a good name for, as in The Omen. Damian, chair of the committee in the UK, said that they called for urgent action to tackle the threat posed by fake news, including the possibility of social media being liable for the content posted online. Folks, if we go back to the essence, and I know it wasn't an exact quote, but the idea that we will, I may disagree with you violently, but I will defend to the death your right to say it. That was a summary of Voltaire's statements. It wasn't exactly what he had to say. But why can't we have that? Why are they afraid of a free marketplace of ideas? You have to ask yourself that question. You have to ask yourself, how dangerous is it when we have a ministry of truth? Isn't this what we always talked about with the Soviet Union, with Pravda? No truth in Pravda, no news in Izvestia, right? And there's no freedom in the UK press. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Let's talk about some First Amendment issues because we have Roger Stone joining us in the next segment to talk about Julian Assange. Let's understand, folks, that the torch of First Amendment freedom is not being carried by mainstream media anymore. That is an absolute lie that is being told by Carl Bernstein, saying CNN is to the Trump era what the Washington Post was to Watergate. Nonsense. Nonsense. We just had the movie The Post that was done by Steven Spielberg. Had Meryl Streep, had Tom Hanks in it. And they were twisting themselves into pretzels to pat themselves on the back about the Pentagon Papers. Well, how do they justify becoming the lapdogs of the deep state and the CIA and completely ignoring the plight of Julian Assange? The silence from the mainstream media is deafening. This is one of the reasons why they want to ban Alex Jones and Infowars. And of course, Facebook blocked Alex Jones for 30 days. You're not watching us on our Facebook channel if you're watching this program. They stopped our live streaming here as well. They took it down for bullying and hate speech. You know what? They are the ones who are bullying. They're the ones who are bullying free speech. They are the ones who hate free speech. YouTube, Facebook are the ones who hate that. I'm going to put up a Facebook thing, and I'm going to do that. I'm just going to put it up as my own personal one. I'm going to control tightly the content because I don't want any cartoon garbage that they can say that, they can shut it down for that. Now, if they're going to shut me down, they're going to shut me down because I'm complaining about the CIA or because I'm complaining about the Washington Post and other manifestations of the CIA, because I'm complaining about their false flag attacks. You shut me down for that. Don't shut me down for some comic book nonsense. I'm not going to have any staged fights or anything like that. I'm going to set up a real site, so I'll let you know when I get that up. I've never been on Facebook. Don't like to. Well, I was on maybe 10 years ago for a brief period of time. It's like, this is a waste of time. But I'll put it out there, and we'll see how long it takes them to shut us down for putting something real out there. Ted Cruz said, I'm no fan of Jones. Among other things, he has a habit of repeatedly slandering my dad by falsely and absurdly accusing him of killing JFK. But who the hell made Facebook the arbiter of political speech? Free speech includes views you disagree with, hashtag First Amendment. He's absolutely right. Look, I got a lot of different disagreements with Ted Cruz. I don't think he did himself any favors when he was running against President Trump. I think he annoyed a lot of conservatives, a lot of Trump supporters. But folks, here in Texas, if you think that this other guy, Beto, what is his last name? Beto, what's his, O'Rourke, thank you. Yeah, I knew it was an Irish name. It's kind of funny, he doesn't want to use the O'Rourke. He'll use the Beto. That tells you something about the identity politics now, doesn't it? But if you think that Beto O'Rourke is going to be on your side, just take a look at Doug Jones in Alabama. Nobody is perfect. But if Ted Cruz is going to stand up for the First Amendment, that is a big difference between him and Beto O'Rourke, who wants to open up our borders and he wants to close ICE and many other things that he's talked about. He is one of the radical Democrats, like Ocasio-Cortez. So you want a really radical Democrat? You vote for Beto. I say we should put up signs that say veto Beto. That's what I'm going to do when it comes November. I'm going to veto Beto. But then we look at what's happening with Twitter. As I pointed out last week, it wasn't just attacks on conservatives and on Twitter, people who are offering their opinion, people like you or people like us. They also came for the politicians. And of course, they understand that. Anybody with half a brain understands that if you establish the principle, it's just what we were talking about with the UK in the last segment. You establish the principle that you can censor the press, that you can tell them, don't report on this. We're going to grab this guy who's doing a report outside of a courtroom. We're going to send him to jail, and you're not allowed to report on this. Oh, and by the way, we're not going to give him a trial. We're not going to give him a jury hearing. We're not going to do anything. We're just going to send him to jail for a year. And don't you report on it. They eventually lifted that because they realized that the press was on their side. They realized, oh, wait a minute. The BBC is going to tell everybody how he deserves to be in jail without trial. And so will the Guardian. And so would the Washington Post if they were there, or the New York Times. But as the Free Beacon points out, Twitter statements about how they don't shadow ban people actually kind of sounds like they shadow ban. There's a lot of prominent Republicans, the RNC chairwoman, other congressmen. They were shadow banned because their names didn't show up in the Twitter search box. So you go to Twitter and you type there and you say, well, I want to find David Knight. And instead of showing you that, they say, well, we don't shadow ban. You're always able to see tweets from accounts that you follow, although you may have to do more work to find them. Like you may have to go directly to their profile. And I've said before, even my own staff couldn't find one of my tweets. I couldn't find it. I told them I don't have time to look at this. It may be buried further. They couldn't find it. They had to log on as me and then go to my tweets as me in order to see a tweet that I put out. This is what's called shadow banning. Now, they put that on there, and then after the congressman talked about that, they removed it. We've had Devin Nunes say we're now looking at legal remedies to deal with them. He wasn't specific about it. This is something, by the way, that Vice News pointed out, that Twitter is censoring pro-Trump lawmakers, some of the top ones, not doing it to any Democrats. People like Devin Nunes, Mark Meadows, Jim Jordan, John Ratcliffe, and others. And then you have Matt Gaetz filing an FEC complaint against Twitter. I mean, take a look, not just against him, but against a guy who is running for state office. And Facebook, I think it was, said, we're not going to put your ad out. We're not going to let you buy an ad saying that the NRA endorsed you. And so as a result, we saw last week Twitter shares dropping. They experienced the worst single-day percentage drop. This is not Facebook now. This is Twitter. Facebook lost the most that any stock has ever lost. Then the next day or so, the same thing happened to Twitter. Why? Was it earnings per share? No. Earnings per share were expected to be 17 cents. They were 17 cents, so that wasn't it. Was it revenue? No, they expected it to be 696 million. It was 711 million. Was it the number of active users? Yes. It dropped 335 million versus 338 million they expected. And so the shares dropped by 14%. Because as we were hearing from people, I said, well, all these new rules in the EU applied to Facebook, that's going to really hurt them financially. No, they'll find a way to monetize your data. They've got tons of your data, and they're going to find new and ingenious ways to monetize it. That's not what it is. It's the fact that people are abandoning Facebook and Twitter. They're killing themselves, and they will kill themselves for censorship because they know that once they accomplish the mission, they will get the rewards from their masters who have put them in this position in the first place. They are the glove over the iron fist of government censorship. That's the mask. That's what Twitter, Facebook, Google are. They're the mask for that censorship. Stay with us. We'll be right back. We're going to talk about Julian Assange with Roger Stone. Welcome back. I'm David Knight. Joining us now is Roger Stone. We had Carl Bernstein come out just yesterday saying CNN is to the Trump era what the Washington Post was to Watergate. Does that mean that is complete with FBI collusion with the deep state? It wasn't just Mark Felt, I don't think, that was deep throat for the deep state back then. There was a lot of people in the FBI that were colluding to try to do a coup. That's what they see themselves as doing. They certainly are not the Washington Post that was presented in the movie that came out last year by Steven Spielberg, The Post, talking about the release of the Pentagon Papers. These people are cowards. As Medium points out, in refusing to defend Julian Assange, mainstream media exposes its true nature. You won't hear the New York Times, the Washington Post, other mainstream outlets talk about what is happening to Julian Assange and the First Amendment. It is a personal tragedy, but it is a tragedy for all of us. So joining us now is Roger Stone, and Roger Stone has some breaking news to tell us about Julian Assange and attempts to help him. Thank you for joining us, Roger.
Well, thank you, David. As I think most people have seen, there have now been credible reports, including one by ABC, saying that the government of Ecuador is in negotiations with the governor of Britain to seize Assange and arrest him for the bail jumping claims against him in the UK and presumably extradite him to the United States for trial. Jeff Sessions, out of the blue, expressed his zeal for such a trial. He is very excited. This is the greatest double standard I've ever seen. Julian Assange, first of all, is not a Russian asset. That is unproven. It's a claim by the intelligence community. They say it over and over and over again. They provided no proof. He denies it vehemently. He has certainly released information detrimental to Russia, so it makes little sense. And then secondarily, as you know, the Washington Post, New York Times, virtually every major newspaper in the country publishes classified information. That's what newspapers do.
That's right. That's what the Pentagon Papers were. That's what that movie from Spielberg was all about. The fact that, somebody steals this stuff. If it was Daniel Ellsberg who got the stuff, the Washington Post and the New York Times were entitled under freedom of the press that we used to value at that time. They were entitled to print this stuff without prosecution. Now, the government could come after the person who was the whistleblower, the person who leaked it, but not after the press. And that is the whole issue with Julian Assange.
Well, it's extraordinary when you think about it that they are seeking to extradite him and punish him for this crime. The Obama Justice Department figured out that if you prosecuted Assange, you'd have to prosecute the Washington Post and the New York Times. I think this is a very dangerous turn of events, and that's why we at Infowars have posted a petition to the president to pardon Julian Assange. I think this is vitally important. As we both know, the entire Russian collusion hoax and the unproven claim that the server at the DNC was hacked by the Russians is an attempt to link Assange to the Russians. He has said repeatedly that he did not get this from any state source. So yes. I think that their entire plan to extradite Assange to the United States could backfire in their place, presumably.
And I think it was a red herring from the very beginning. They didn't want people to pay attention to the information, so they came up with this conspiracy theory about Russia, and it was debunked by Julian Assange, as well as a former British ambassador said, somebody handed this to me. It has been disproven by William Binney that there was anything there. The only proof that they have is the word of CrowdStrike, which is a DNC contractor, and they never allowed the FBI to even examine these servers. So the whole thing is a fictional story.
Well, we need people to go to the Infowars.com site now, find the petition to help Julian Assange, to urge President Trump to pardon Assange and put an end to this hoax. I think it's vitally important that Assange clear his name. This claim that he conspired with the Russians to hack the DNC is just as untrue as the rest of that entire narrative that the left is so committed to.
Yes, absolutely. And that article, you can find it at Infowars, is Petition to Trump, Pardon Julian Assange. And we have a link there. Sign and spread this petition so it can reach President Trump to fully and unconditionally pardon Julian Assange in the interests of both justice and mercy. And I would add, in the interest of free speech and the First Amendment. This is a vital case in freedom of the press. This is a long-established principle that they were overthrowing. And, when you talk about this, whether or not he's going to be persecuted, and as you said, Roger, the Obama lawyer said, hey, if we persecute WikiLeaks and Julian Assange, we'll have to prosecute the Washington Post and the New York Times. Not necessarily, because we have selective prosecution of people all the time that is now happening with the government. Some people get a pass, like Hillary Clinton, and other people get viciously persecuted, like the Navy sailor.
Yes, indeed. Well, there is a third possibility, and that is, of course, Ecuador and Britain could extradite him to a country where he would be safe. We just don't know what's going on, but I think his days there are numbered. His health is poor. He's been a veritable prisoner in the tiny Ecuadorian compound, which is not nearly as grandiose as it might sound.
I'm very concerned that what the Ecuadorian president is saying is not true, because we've had the legal counsel for Julian Assange come out and say, he says, well, we've been in contact with lawyers for Julian Assange and so forth, and we've been talking to these other people. And the lawyers came out and said, no, as a matter of fact, he hasn't talked to us. As a matter of fact, we've tried to talk to him, to the president of Ecuador, Lenin Moreno, but he has refused to talk to us. So it's not really clear if we can trust what he has to say. He keeps saying that he is going to, he's wanting to get rid of Julian Assange and willing to turn him over as long as he can get an assurance that he will not be extradited and executed. And I don't think that we can count on him to do that. I think that's why this petition is vitally important.
David, I could not agree with you more, and I'm delighted to have been here to talk about it. We got to get this moving. I think it's one of our highest priorities. The censorship of Assange is just like the censorship of Alex Jones and Infowars and all these voices that don't agree with the mainstream media and don't agree with the two-party duopoly and the neocons who are running the country.
Yeah, it is very dangerous, and it is absolutely amazing, I think, Roger, to see how rapidly these movements everywhere across the world are shaping up to shut down free speech and a free internet, just like I was talking about earlier. The UK saying that they're going to put heavy fines against Facebook and Twitter if they don't preemptively censor anything that the government disagrees with, or if the government disagrees with it, they're just going to take that information away. They're taking what we have seen done to Tommy Robinson, to Julian Assange. This is going to be applied to everybody. And many people on the left need to understand where this is headed. We know that the Washington Post and CNN and the New York Times are not going to complain about this because they are part of the deep state, always have been and still are. They're part of the Operation Mockingbird. They don't care about free press because they think they have immunity from prosecution by the government because they're part of the government. They're government mouthpieces.
Absolutely right. And I've never seen a greater hysteria. The better the economy does under the president, the more hysterical they get. Isn't there a cause and effect there, I think?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. It's absolutely amazing to see what they're doing. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Roger. And this is something that really needs attention. Again, you can find this petition at Infowars. There is a link there in the article, and you can sign that petition. You need to spread that around while you still can spread information. Like I said before, they're not going to let you see information. They're not going to let you hear information. They're not going to let you share and spread information. If they have their way, they're going to shut all of that stuff down. And we have to stand together. We will hang together, as the founders of this country said, or we will hang separately when it comes to the First Amendment, especially. And that includes you, because your speech as an individual is being infringed upon by these types of measurements. It's not just Julian Assange. It's not just Infowars. They are coming after your speech as well, and your right to know and to debate in public. Stay with us. We'll be right back. I'm David Knight. Welcome back. I'm David Knight. I want to talk a little bit more about free speech issues here because, folks, we can't just cavalierly move on from this issue. It's not just us. It's not just Tommy Robinson. It's not just Julian Assange. It is your speech as well. And to keep this program going, we don't just need the ability and access to be able to spread information. We also have to be able to fund this operation. The way we do that is with the products that we sell at InfoWarsStore.com. And we have some new products that we have put on sale. We have 25% off the Super Silver Wound Dressing Gel. That's a great way to topically add nano silver to minor cuts and burns before they get out of control. Very effective and the first topical product of nano silver we've had. And then we also have some new products that are based around fish oil. We have a krill oil and a fish oil product. We have 3 different products that are fish oil based. You can take a look at those at InfoWarsStore.com. You can get them individually, 25% off, just like the discount we have for the new Super Silver Wound Dressing. Or you can get all 3 of those fish oil products together at 40% off. Please take a look at InfoWarsStore.com. That is what keeps us going here financially. Let's finish and put some bookends on what Roger was just saying. Again, going back to Carl Bernstein, saying CNN is to the Trump era what the Washington Post was to Watergate. Okay, all right. And, of course, he was one who was getting information from Mark Felt. He was the number 2 at the FBI at the time. He had all these files that he had managed to save from J. Edgar Hoover, that J. Edgar Hoover had created all these dossiers, real stuff, not fake dossiers like the stuff that was written by Hillary Clinton and Fusion GPS and Christopher Steele. Real stuff, real dirt about politicians that he was using to blackmail them. And we had multiple presidents talking about that. Nixon, Truman, all these guys. Truman even said, hey, the FBI under Hoover is trending towards a Gestapo, something very un-American. And of course, they were very much un-American. And they did their own little coup. And so I'm sure that Carl Bernstein would like to see this happen again with the people at the top of the FBI, just like they did with the coup that they did against Nixon. Except now they are the burglars. It is the Washington Post that is stealing information from people. But one of the things that he said was, so like in Watergate, said Bernstein, You have a very serious news organization, CNN. Stop right there. CNN pays him. Oh, so they're a very serious news organization. It's the CIA news network or the Clinton news network. They pass her answers to questions that are going to be coming up in town hall, things like that. He says, in Watergate, the Washington Post, making judgments about what is news. Well, that's interesting. They do make judgments, don't they? And, of course, their judgments are the ones that count, not anybody else's. We go out, he said, we do our reporting, and then we decide what is news and what is the best obtainable version of the truth. They decide what is news. They decide what is truth. You like that arrangement? I grew up under that arrangement. I've seen the lies and propaganda of the American Mockingbird press. CIA had Operation Mockingbird. It was every bit as bad as what the Russians had. They would collude with the government. They would always report the same stuff. They would always have the same angle on everything. If you disagreed with them, or if you thought that there was a story that they weren't covering, oh, shut up. You're fake. We're going to shut you down. We're going to censor the entire news organization. And what they're doing is they're shutting down our free society. Shame on Bernstein. He has been outed as a government shill yet again. Last Tuesday, a top lawyer for the New York Times named David McCraw, reports Medium, warned a room full of judges that the prosecution of Julian Assange for Wikileaks publications would set a very dangerous precedent, which would end up hurting mainstream news media outlets like the New York Times, like the Washington Post, and other outlets that publish secret government documents, as they established in that movie that they worshipped themselves, The Post, Steven Spielberg's thing. They were not liable for publishing information that was put out there by somebody who was a whistleblower like Daniel Ellsberg. He wanted to expose the lies and the misinformation of the government about the Vietnam War. And they put that information out there under freedom of the press. And I'm glad that they did. But they wouldn't do that again. They're trying to shut that down for other people. As Ray McGovern, who used to do the daily briefing for the president's information from the CIA said, he said, curiously, as of this writing, this lawyer for the New York Times, David McCraw's words have found no mention in the Times itself. They won't even report what their lawyer says about the dangerous precedent. That's what Ray McGovern is pointing out. He says, so your own lawyer is saying it's going to shut down freedom of the press for you, have grave consequences for the New York Times, but the New York Times won't report what he has to say. That the prosecution of Julian Assange, this is what he had to say, would be a very, very bad precedent for publishers. Now, I don't really care about publishers. I care about freedom of the press. I care about freedom of speech. As Medium goes on to say, New York Times is aware of this. They know what their lawyer is saying, yet they don't report it. They know that if the government is going to prosecute a publisher of information like this, like Julian Assange, that they could be liable for doing this in the future. So what does that tell you? Therefore, that means that the New York Times doesn't have any intention of ever publishing again anything that is detrimental to the government's lies and misinformation. They're never intending to do that again. They don't care if Julian Assange goes to jail because they're never going to tell you the truth about the government. They have no intention of doing that. They won't have any legal jeopardy. They say, just forget the lawyer. We're not going to ever print anything about the government that the government doesn't want us to print. And then what are we being told by the mainstream media? They're giving us all the assurances of this president of Ecuador, Lenin Moreno. He has said, we have followed very closely the statements of President Lenin Moreno, both in the U.S. and the United Kingdom and Spain, said the lawyer for Julian Assange. Now, what did he say? Lenin said the issue of Mr. Assange is being treated with the British government, and I understand that we have already established contact with Mr. Assange's lawyers so we can find a way out. Not true, says Mr. Assange's lawyers. Not true. He said the defense of Julian Assange is concerned about the contradictions of the government of Ecuador, which claims to be seeking a solution to the asylum of the founder of WikiLeaks through dialogue with all parties. But they refuse to meet with the lawyers of WikiLeaks, of Julian Assange. And so they said they've requested a hearing. They've requested a meeting in both London and in Madrid, but they've been told that his schedule is full during his whole tour because this guy from Ecuador, the president, is going to both Spain and to the UK, to London and to Madrid, but he doesn't have time to meet with them. He's claiming in public that he has talked to them, but he has not, according to them. In other words, Moreno is talking out of both sides of his mouth. while pretending to care about Julian Assange. I say, we know how Marino addresses the issue, said the lawyer for Julian Assange. He said the president's statements leave us confused. He's saying one thing and doing another. That's why it's very important, again, to go to Infowars. You'll find a link to a petition to reach President Trump and tell him that it is vital not only to be fair, not only to be just, but also to uphold the vital principles of freedom of the press. This is an opportunity for President Trump to get on top of this whole thing. Yes, I agree with President Trump that so much of what comes out of CNN is fake news. It is lies and propaganda. Now, they have taken that criticism and said, you want to shut down freedom of the press. It'll be interesting to see if President Trump follows the advice of Jeff Sessions and some of these neocons and prosecutes, imprisons, or even executes Julian Assange. It'll be interesting to see if anybody at the New York Times and Washington Post has a problem with that. They haven't had a problem with any of the talk about this yet. They don't want to stand up for his First Amendment rights. They don't want to stand up for freedom of the press. The Ecuadorian president said, well, I'm fine with this. I've been talking with them. The only thing that I want is a guarantee that he will not get the death penalty, that he will not be executed. He says the only person he hasn't spoken to is Mr. Assange himself. Well, he hasn't talked to his lawyers either, and he's lied about that. And so much for all of the assurances that there won't be any execution. Why should he even be in prison if we have freedom of the press? Will they do this in a trial? Will he be able to get a jury trial? Or will they do some kind of a phony military proceeding so they can deny Julian Assange a jury trial? It is important for you to sign that petition, make your voice heard, because this is about more than one organization. It's about more than one person. This is a full spectrum attack on the First Amendment against Wikileaks, against Infowars, even against Fox News, against Republican congressmen. They're not shutting down Democrat congressmen. And I tell you what, it is time to stand up and say something. They are lowering the hammer, just as we were warned by Matt Drudge before the election. So if Hillary Clinton wins, they're going to do blah, blah. Well, she didn't win, and they're still doing it. And we need to speak up and tell President Trump to stand up to this. Stay with us. We'll be right back.